Well, the Chicago Cubs, one of the most interesting teams this MLB offseason, my friends. Clem's joining me here to discuss that with us in a matter of moments. But before we get there, hey, howdy, and a big welcome back to Clemhawks, folks. I'm Yak, ready to take me and Clem through another big ol' MLB video this afternoon. If you're new to the channel, we'd ask you right now to consider hitting that subscribe button here on Clemhawks. We are now within 20 subscribers of 4,000. And you know you want to see more of that great hair from our man Clem. Anyway, Clem, good afternoon. Glad to have you aboard. What are we talking about here with the Cubs today?
We are talking about two specific roles that the Cubs are still looking to fill this offseason.
All right, can you elaborate?
Yes. So, we're doing some research, came across this website called fansided.com. Talk a lot about sports. I've never heard of it before, but one of the articles written by Kevin Henry, again, don't know who that is, but he stated that the Cubs are still looking to fill two specific roles in their team to, arguably compete in the NL Central. Like, the Cardinals are still really good. They've made some big moves. It doesn't make any sense why the Cardinals let Contreras go, but the Cardinals are still the top dog. The Cubs are trying to make like two moves to get there, and that includes the bullpen and like a bench player, is what the article says. So, a couple of names that come to mind right off the top of our head is Zach McKinstry, who was an infielder last year for him. We can get into his stats in a second, but Zach McKinstry looks to be a pretty solid option again for them. And then Andrew Chafin, we've talked about him a few times, but looks like the Cubs are still eyeing him. His trade rumors have died off a little bit in the last few days, but those are two big names that they could go after pretty easily. And then Jurickson and Profar still on the table, but not sure if the Cubs are targeting him.
So are we going to be sitting here at this point of the off season? We're about a few weeks away from pitchers and catchers reporting. I think in fact two. We're pretty much going to be talking about the same recycled about 5 to 6 guys for every team. So is it any shock that the Cubs are potentially in on any of these players or eyeing these players to fill their holes?
Like I was saying before, is like the Cardinals are by far, I think, still the best team in that division. And the Cubs need to do something. Like the Brewers, for example, have done hardly anything. The Pirates really did nothing. The Reds have only sold players. Like it looks like the Cubs are the only team that has a chance. And of course, they went out and signed Dansby Swanson, Trey Mancini. So they have players to do this. But it's very clear, I think, that there is a gap between those two teams, the Cardinals and the Cubs. So they need to do something. And like you said, there is going to be about 4 or 5 guys that actually make a difference on a team's roster. Jurickson and Profar, I think, is the biggest one, but again, doesn't look like the Cubs are necessarily targeting him. They would be able to afford him, which I think he could fit in very well. If not in the lineup, like as a bench player, I think he would probably get a lot of starting time, but they could afford him. And then Andrew Chafin, who he's a solid lefty reliever. He's going to give you, if you pull up his stats, he's going to give you, around a 3 ERA, which is fine for a reliever. He's going to be a solid lefty coming out of the pen. He's not going to be a shutdown guy, but there's two guys that the Cubs they should target. I think it would be wrong for them to not at least try.
So now a lot of this argument is the Cubs need to compete against the Cardinals. In the greater context of the NL playoff picture, is it necessarily the Cubs' only shot of getting anywhere in the postseason this year is winning the division, or is there maybe, you know what, you don't make these moves, but you've got Swanson, you got Mancini, you got the rest of this Cubs roster, and suddenly, yeah, you know what, you go out there, get a wild card spot, and you've got just as good of a shot as the Cardinals do.
Well, on any other year, I'd probably say that yeah, you could fight for a wild card spot, but like you just look at this lineup, like they have their pitching, especially like pitching is what wins you games, of course, in the playoffs. You've got Kyle Hendricks, Marcus Stroman, Jamison Talion. That's about it. That is not a great starting rotation. Like they need to go win the division. because you've got the Phillies who made moves and got Trey Turner, and the Braves are in that division. The Mets went out and got Verlander and so many other guys and signed everybody in the planet. Like, those three teams will probably make the playoffs. So you're looking at one other spot. The Giants and the Padres are going to be fighting the Dodgers. Like, basically, it would come down to the Cubs. Are they better than the Padres or the Phillies? The answer is very much no. So I think the only chance they have is to try and take the division against the Cardinals. Cardinals, I think, are a little bit weaker than they were last year, but they're still miles ahead of the Cubs. And that's why I think you need to go pick up like a Chafin, a Profar. I don't know if McKinstry necessarily moves the needle, but like he's not really a great player. Like, that's what I'm saying is like these guys are not really needle pushers, but they need to try something because what they're doing right now is not going to be enough.
So you've talked a lot about Profar then, and you're saying that he's the guy out of these three that would do the most damage for the Cubs. What exactly are we looking at in terms of stats, in terms of player quality, in terms of any kind of quantifiable metric that you can have to kind of back up that argument?
Well, I'll start with Andrew Chafin actually because I think pitching is more important, and I think there are just so many other teams that are interested in Profar. It probably won't be the Cubs, but Chafin, we've talked about him a few times. Like, he's been a journeyman. He's 32. He's got a ton of experience. His career ERA is under 3.25. He's got a 7 career WAR. Like, how many seasons is that? 9 years. He's about a 1 average WAR player per year. Yak is tired. Holy
I
cow.
am. I am. Up till midnight
But,
last night.
you know, 2-3 last year, 60 innings, a lefty, 67 strikeouts. Like, that's not bad. That's what you can expect out of a guy. And like I mentioned with the roster, like, they just have nobody really solid. Like, their best lefty right now is probably Drew Smiley. And he's like the only lefty. You got Justin Steele, Brandon Hughes, that's it, and Smiley. So they need another lefty. That's why I think it's crucial that Andrew Chafin is part of that conversation for the Cubs. Like, if you don't get another lefty, which again, I don't think there are a ton of lefties out there. Keep the hair up. I don't think there are a ton of lefties out there anymore. You have to go get Chafin. Otherwise, the conversation is off the table entirely, I think, and then they just waste the whole season. But if you want to talk about Profar, I think that again, I think it's possible from a financial standpoint and what they need. He's a shortstop. He's a second baseman. He's an outfielder. Like, he can play everywhere. Same with McKinstry, by the way. Like, that's why I think if they don't go after Profar, McKinstry's a viable second option. He did fine last year, but first Profar, 3.1 WAR, OPS plus of over 100, 15 home runs, 58 RBI. He's going to be solid. But again, if they don't go that route, they have McKinstry, who hit 5 home runs, 14 RBIs, was above average player in terms of WAR. I mean, he had a .6. Like I said, he's not going to be a needle pusher or anything, but a 78 OPS plus in 47 games. He's going to be a filler guy, and that's what the Cubs need too. They don't necessarily need a Profar. They have a decent lineup, but their pitching is where they really struggle. And yeah, Profar would help. McKinstry's cheaper. He's only going to be about $1 million a year. They could go after him, but they need Andrew Chafin or another lefty if somebody comes up. But
All right. Well, that's where we're sitting, my friends. That's your review on kind of the Chicago Cubs and where we sit going into these final 2-ish weeks away from away from the start of MLB spring training with pitchers and catchers reporting. I'm Yak. He's Clem. Thanks so much for tuning in, friends. We are up on Odo here.